August 18, 1945. 3 days after Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast. World War II is over, but in a remote research facility outside Harbin, Manchuria, someone forgot to tell the experiments to stop. Captain David Morris and his U.S. Army intelligence team arrived expecting an abandoned Japanese military installation. What they found was a facility still operational, generators running, lights on, cultures alive. And in the sub-basement, 7 people who should not have survived what was done to them, but did. Because the scientists who created them believed something. They believed the Americans would want the research more than they'd want justice. They weren't entirely wrong. This is the story of what Captain Morris found in that compound, what his team documented, what they were ordered to preserve, and what they chose to destroy instead. If you want to hear the stories that were buried in classified files, the encounters that were written out of official reports, the decisions that soldiers carried for the rest of their lives, hit that subscribe button. Because some truths don't stay buried forever. The compound sat in a white field 3 kilometers north of Harbin, smoke rising from a single chimney against the gray August sky. Captain David Morris studied it through field glasses from the tree line, counting the buildings, 12 surface structures arranged in a grid, all displaying faded red crosses on their roofs. The markings were fresh enough to have been painted after the surrender announcement. Someone wanted this place to look like a hospital when the occupation forces arrived. "Generators running," Staff Sergeant Robert Zhao said beside him, his breath visible in the cold. "Hear it?" Morris did. A steady diesel hum carried across the frozen ground. The power lines leading to the main building were intact, insulated properly against the winter. This wasn't a hasty evacuation. This was selective abandonment. Some things left behind because they couldn't be moved, or because someone believed they wouldn't need to be. Behind them, Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson adjusted his medical bag. "How long since the last intelligence report placed personnel here?" 48 hours, Morris answered. "Soviet advance is 12 hours out. We have maybe 6 hours before their forward elements reach this sector." He lowered the glasses. "Command wants documents and evidence of biological weapons production. Anything that proves Imperial Japan violated the Geneva Protocol." Sergeant William Harper finished checking his Thompson submachine gun, the metal clicking in the silence. "And if we find personnel?" "CIC detainment protocols," Morris said. "Scientists are to be secured for tribunal testimony, technical staff for intelligence debriefing." He didn't mention the other orders, the ones that came through sealed channels from officers whose names he'd never heard before. Secure all research data. Coordinate extraction of key personnel through separate channels. Preserve primary documentation. Technical Sergeant Frank Romano crouched near a snowbank, studying tracks that crossed the access road. "Vehicle convoy moved through here. Heavy trucks, maybe 8 to 10. 48 hours old, maybe less." He pointed toward the main gate. "But those footprints are fresh. 6 hours maximum." Zhao pulled out a cigarette, then thought better of it. "Japanese." "Boot treads match Imperial Army standard issue," Romano confirmed. "Someone stayed behind." Morris led them down the slope in tactical formation, weapons ready but not raised. The compound gate stood open, chain cut and lying in the snow. No guards at the gatehouse, no sentries on the watchtowers. The only sound was wind through empty buildings and that steady generator pulse. The first structure they cleared was a barracks, bunks stripped, footlockers empty, not even a forgotten pack of cigarettes. The second was a mess hall with tables still arranged in neat rows, the kitchen scrubbed clean. The third building made Patterson stop at the doorway. "This was an animal facility," he said quietly. "Large scale. Cages lined both walls, floor to ceiling. Most were empty, but some still contained occupants. Rats, rabbits, guinea pigs, all dead but not from neglect. Each cage had a placard with Japanese characters and a red stamp. Zhao moved along the wall, reading. Plague, he said. This row is all plague variants. That section is cholera. The far wall. He paused. Experimental hybrids. Cross-species transmission trials. Morris examined one cage where a rabbit lay curled in a corner. Its fur was matted with dried blood, but the water bottle was full, and food pellets scattered the floor. They fed them before they left. No, Patterson said, crouching near the cage. Look at the condition. These animals died within the last 24 hours. And these placards. He pulled one from a cage. This date is from yesterday, August 18th, 3 days after the Emperor's broadcast. Harper swept his light across the ceiling, where ventilation ducts ran toward the main building. Isolated system. They could test airborne transmission without contaminating the whole compound. Romano found the door to the main laboratory complex at the far end of the animal facility. It was steel, with a wheel-lock mechanism like a ship's bulkhead. A handwritten sign in Japanese was taped to the surface. Zhao translated, "Quarantine protocol active. Authorized personnel only. Decontamination required." The door was unlocked. The laboratory stretched the entire length of the main building, divided into sections by glass partitions. The lights were on. The temperature was controlled, cold enough to preserve cultures, warm enough to keep water lines from freezing. Every surface was stainless steel or glass, reflecting harsh fluorescent light. Morris moved along the first workstation, where Petri dishes sat in neat rows beneath observation microscopes. Each dish was labeled in Japanese and English both. Yersinia pestis, urban transmission vector, trial 47. The cultures were alive, fuzzy growth visible even without magnification. They're still active, Patterson said, examining a dish under better light. These haven't been sterilized. Someone was maintaining them through yesterday, maybe this morning. The next section held incubation chambers, temperature-controlled cabinets where sealed vials rested in padded racks. Zhao opened the cabinet log, reading entries that tracked temperature fluctuations and culture viability. The last entry was dated August 18th, 1945. 0600 hours. 12 hours ago, he said. Harper found a filing cabinet near the observation station. It wasn't locked. Inside were folders organized by subject number, each containing photographs, medical records, and detailed observation logs. He pulled one at random, subject 271, and opened it. The first photograph showed a middle-aged Chinese man in civilian clothes, standing against a height chart. Healthy weight, no visible injuries. The second photograph showed the same man strapped to a surgical table, his abdomen opened, organs exposed but still functioning. The third showed him in a cage, infected wounds covering his body, his eyes fever bright. The fourth showed him dead. The observation log ran 47 pages. Jesus Christ, Harper whispered. Patterson took the folder, scanning the medical notations. His face went pale. They infected him with plague, then performed vivisection to observe the infection's progress through living tissue. No anesthesia. They wanted to document pain response. He flipped pages. Then they introduced a secondary infection, gas gangrene, while he was still alive from the first. This went on for 11 days. Morris forced himself to look at more folders. Subject 272, Subject 273, Subject 274, 30 folders in the first drawer alone, each documenting a different human being reduced to experimental data. Men, women, some children. Zhao found a map on the wall, marked with red pins across Manchuria and China. Japanese text identified each location. He read them silently, his hand trembling against the wall. "These are villages," he said. "Rural populations. Each pin marks a location where they conducted field trials." His finger traced to a cluster of pins in Heilongjiang province. They released infected fleas from aircraft, watched the plague spread naturally, documented mortality rates, transmission patterns, duration until total population collapse. He found a specific pin, labeled in characters he recognized. His voice went hollow. Zhaoxing Village, August 1943. Population 347, survival rate 0. Morris looked at him. Zhao. My mother's village, he said quietly, where my grandparents lived. We stopped getting letters in late 1943. My uncle went to find them in 1944. The village was empty. Just empty. He tapped the pin. They were test subjects. All of them. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of refrigeration units. Romano found the stairs to the sub-basement near the rear of the laboratory. The stairwell descended 15 feet below ground level, ending at another pressure door. This one had a viewing port, thick glass set into steel. Morris looked through it and immediately stepped back. We need Patterson down here. The sub-basement was a containment ward, a long corridor lined with cells on both sides, each sealed behind glass and steel. Most were empty. 7 were occupied. Patterson descended with his medical bag, his face already set in the professional mask he used for autopsies. But when he looked through the viewing port, the mask cracked. They're alive! The subjects in the cells were not prisoners awaiting execution. They were experiments in progress, kept viable through medical intervention that bordered on the surgical obscene. Each cell contained a hospital bed, IV stands, monitoring equipment. Each subject was conscious. Cell 1 held a man in his 30s. His torso opened from sternum to pelvis, the wound held apart by surgical retractors. Clear plastic sheeting covered the opening, allowing observation of internal organs. He was breathing. His eyes tracked them through the glass. Cell 2 contained a woman whose limbs had been removed and replaced with primitive prosthetics connected directly to bone. Tubes ran from her body to collection vessels, her head turned toward the viewing port. Cell 3 held 2 children, siblings perhaps, joined surgically at the shoulder and hip, shared circulation. One boy's heart was visible through a chest window. They held hands. Patterson pressed his palm against the glass, his voice shaking. They're observing survival duration under surgical trauma, testing how long the human body can sustain catastrophic injury with minimal intervention. This one, he pointed to cell 4, where a man's skull had been partially removed, brain tissue exposed beneath a sealed dome. He's conscious. They're mapping pain response in real-time neural tissue. Harper turned away, fighting nausea. Why didn't they kill them before evacuating? Morris found a logbook on a desk near the corridor entrance. The entries were meticulous. Vital signs recorded every 6 hours, culture samples taken, photographs documented. The final entry was dated August 18th, 0800 hours. Evacuation complete. Research continuation suspended. Subjects remain viable for Allied intelligence assessment. Data preservation prioritized over subject termination. Survival duration post-abandonment will provide additional baseline metrics. They left them alive on purpose, Morris said. They thought we'd want the data, that we'd continue the observations. Patterson moved from cell to cell, his medical training forcing him to assess what training and conscience told him was impossible. In cell 5, a man had been infected with multiple pathogens simultaneously: plague, cholera, typhus, each introduced at calculated intervals to observe immune system collapse in stages. The monitoring equipment beside his bed still tracked heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, all declining but stable enough that death was still hours or days away. They're all conscious, Patterson said, his voice clinical now, the only way he could function. Deliberately kept conscious, no analgesics in any of the IV lines. They wanted cognitive function intact for response testing. Romano examined the cell doors, sealed from outside. Electronic locks tied to the generator. If the power fails, they stay locked. He traced the ventilation system. Independent air supply. They could flood these cells with gas and the rest of the facility would be unaffected. Zhao stood before cell 3, where the two children watched him through the glass. One boy's lips moved, forming words in Mandarin. Zhao's hand rose slowly to the glass. "He's asking if we're here to help them," Zhao said. "He wants to know if his mother's outside." Morris pulled him back gently. "We need to finish the documentation. Harper, start photographing everything. Patterson, medical assessment of each subject, what was done to them, current viability, any identifying information." "For what purpose?" Patterson asked. "War crimes tribunals? Evidence collection?" He gestured toward the cells. "These people are evidence, Morris, living evidence, and they're going to die whether we do anything or not. The only question is when and how much they suffer first." "We follow protocol," Morris said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We document, we secure the facility, we wait for orders." "Soviet artillery is getting closer," Harper said. "We've got maybe 4 hours before they're in artillery range. 2 hours after that, infantry arrives. You think they're going to wait for our orders?" They spent the next hour documenting systematic horror. Patterson's medical notes grew increasingly terse, his handwriting degrading as he moved from subject to subject. Harper's photographs captured what words couldn't convey: the precise surgical interventions, the monitoring equipment still recording human dissolution in real time, the supplies stacked neatly in corners because the experiments were meant to continue indefinitely. Zhao translated documents from the filing cabinets: medical protocols, experiment objectives, personnel rosters listing names and ranks of every scientist, surgeon, and technician involved, supply requisitions for surgical equipment, culture media, test subjects. The paperwork was immaculate, organized with bureaucratic precision. One folder contained correspondence between the facility commander and Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo. Zhao read it aloud, his voice flat. August 10th, 1945. In the event of Allied occupation, primary research data and key personnel are to be evacuated through designated channels. Secondary data and ongoing experiments are to be preserved in situ for potential Allied intelligence cooperation. Historical precedent suggests victorious powers value scientific advancement over wartime conduct accountability. Morris looked up. "They thought we'd trade amnesty for research data." "They weren't wrong," Harper said quietly. He held up another folder, this one marked with an American OSS header stamp. "This is from our own intelligence service, dated August 12th. Instructions for securing biological warfare research from Japanese facilities before Soviet occupation. Priority objective, obtain data on human pathogen trials. Secondary objective, identify researchers willing to provide technical consultation." The implications settled over them like ash. Patterson closed his medical log. "They knew we were coming. They left everything intact because they believed we'd want it more than we'd want justice." Romano found the facility commander's office on the second floor, a small room overlooking the compound. The desk was cleared, except for a single folder marked Final Report. Inside was a handwritten letter in English, clearly intended for whoever arrived first. Morris read it aloud. To the commanding officer of Allied occupation forces. This facility represents 7 years of biological warfare research conducted under Imperial Japanese military authority. The data contained herein includes human trials that cannot be replicated under peacetime ethical constraints. The scientific value is substantial. The strategic implications are considerable. Personnel responsible for experimental protocols have been evacuated for potential consultation. Subjects remain viable for Allied assessment. Continuation of observation is possible if immediate stabilization is provided. We anticipate mutual benefit from research cooperation. Historical precedent suggests pragmatic powers prioritize strategic advantage over wartime conduct. Facility can be maintained under Allied authority or destroyed at your discretion. However, consider that this data will be lost permanently and that Soviet forces will likely secure similar facilities with less restrictive research applications. I remain available for technical consultation through established intelligence channels. Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, Imperial Japanese Army Medical Corps. Zhao stared at the signature. He signed it. He actually believes we'll protect him. Harper pulled out his own orders, reading them again. Our intelligence directive says to secure all biological warfare research for strategic assessment. It doesn't say anything about war crimes evidence. It says strategic assessment. Because they want the data, Patterson said. They want to know what these bastards learned. They want the research conclusions without having to conduct the research themselves. Morris walked to the window, watching snow fall across the compound. Soviet artillery rumbled in the distance, closer now. We have 2 hours, maybe 3. They gathered in the laboratory, surrounded by active cultures and meticulous documentation of industrialized cruelty. The generator hummed. The lights remained steady. The subjects in the sub-basement remained alive, their vitals still displayed on monitors that no one was watching anymore. Patterson spread his medical notes across a workstation. I need to make a decision about my official report. Everything I've documented here is admissible as war crimes evidence, but the OSS directive suggests they want this research preserved, possibly continued. If I file a complete medical report, it becomes part of the tribunal record. If I file a partial report, it disappears into classified channels, Harper finished, and maybe the people who did this get immunity instead of rope. Zhao held up a stack of translated documents. I've got full personnel rosters, names, ranks, specializations, enough to identify every scientist and surgeon involved. Also village records, every location where they conducted field trials, death tolls, transmission data, documentation of what they did to my mother's village, and 300 others. Morris looked at Romano. How long to wire this facility for complete destruction? 30 minutes if I'm thorough. But Captain, Romano gestured toward the underground cells. Those people down there, they're not going to survive demolition. Hell, they're not going to survive the night. But bringing down this building on top of them is faster than what's happening to them now, Patterson said quietly. Morris descended to the sub-basement alone. The 7 subjects watched him approach, those who could still move their eyes. He stopped at cell 3, where the 2 children joined at shoulder and hip, watched him with something like hope. He had no translator now. No words that would help. He pressed his hand against the glass, and one of the boys did the same, their palms separated by an inch of reinforced barrier. In cell 1, the man whose torso had been opened in permanent vivisection made a sound, not quite words, but clear intent, a plea that transcended language. Morris understood it perfectly. He climbed back to the main laboratory where his team waited. Harper, photograph everything, every document, every culture label, every piece of equipment. Patterson, complete your medical assessments, full detail, nothing omitted. Zhao, translate every personnel roster, every village name, every experiment protocol. I want a complete record. And then, Harper asked, Romano wires the facility. We evacuate all documentation, then we destroy this place completely. The subjects, Patterson started. We'll die when the building comes down, Morris said, which is 3 days or 3 weeks faster than they'll die if we leave them here, and cleaner than whatever the Soviets will do if they arrive first. No one argued. We're not preserving their research, Morris continued. We're documenting their crimes. There's a difference. If command wants to trade immunity for data, they'll do it without my cooperation. Zhao looked at the map of villages, each red pin marking a place where hundreds died as test subjects. And if the war crimes tribunals get buried, if the people who did this never face justice, then at least we'll have tried, Morris said. That's all we can do. They worked in silence for the next hour, each man focused on his task with grim precision. Harper's camera clicked methodically, capturing Petri dishes, surgical equipment, observation logs, and the contents of every filing cabinet. Each photograph documented not just evidence of atrocity, but the systematic bureaucracy that enabled it. Requisition forms for test subjects listed by age and health status, supply orders for vivisection equipment, maintenance schedules for cell ventilation systems. Patterson completed his medical assessments with clinical thoroughness. Subject 1. Male, approximately 35 years, subjected to continuous vivisection without anesthesia for observational purposes, current status, terminal but viable for 48 to 72 additional hours. Subject 2. Female, approximately 28 years, experimental prosthetic integration with concurrent infection trials, current status, septic but stable. The detachment in his writing was the only way he could continue. Zhao worked through the translated documents, his handwriting growing more controlled as he documented his own family's murder in administrative language, village trial sites, population numbers, mortality rates, transmission vectors. Each statistic represented someone's grandfather, someone's child, someone's entire world reduced to data points in an experiment that treated human life as laboratory supply. Romano moved through the facility placing charges, C4 at structural points, thermite against filing cabinets they couldn't carry, phosphorus in the culture storage to ensure complete sterilization. He worked with the careful precision of a man who understood that incomplete destruction would be worse than no destruction at all. Morris found Patterson in the office, hunched over his medical log. The doctor had stopped writing. His pen rested against blank paper, ink bleeding into the fiber. "I took an oath," Patterson said without looking up. "Do no harm, preserve life. I've spent 3 years in this war, documenting death, cataloging casualties, performing autopsies on boys who should have lived another 50 years. But this," he gestured toward the sub-basement, "those people down there are still alive, still conscious, and we're going to kill them." "They're already dead," Morris said. "What's keeping them alive is the same thing that's keeping them in agony. We're not killing them. We're ending what was done to them." "I know the logic," Patterson said. "I understand the ethics. Morphine overdose would be mercy. But I'm still going to be the man who administered lethal doses to 7 people who looked at me with hope." He finally met Morris's eyes. "And the worst part? I'm going to omit it from my official report, because if I document that we euthanized Japanese experimental subjects, it becomes justification for why the research should have been preserved. American forces destroyed valuable evidence and terminated viable subjects. That's how it gets written." Morris had no answer for that. Patterson closed his log. "I'm putting morphine in their IV lines, enough to stop their hearts in 5 minutes. They'll be unconscious in 30 seconds. Then Romano brings down the building. Official cause of death, structural collapse during facility demolition. No one needs to know they were already gone." "I'll help you," Morris said. "No." Patterson stood, collecting supplies from his medical bag. "This one's mine. You document the crimes. Harper photographs the evidence. Zhao translates the testimony. Romano destroys the facility. I end their suffering. We each carry what we can." He descended to the sub-basement alone. 15 minutes later, Patterson emerged. His hands were steady. His face was empty. He said nothing, walking past them to help Romano finish the demolition prep. Harper had filled 6 cases with documents, personnel rosters, experimental protocols, victim photographs, field trial results. Zhao had compiled translations of the most critical materials. Morris had separated the evidence into 2 categories: documentation that proved crimes and research data that explained methods. The first would go to war crimes investigators. The second would be destroyed with the facility. "Command's not going to like that we burned the research findings," Harper said. "Command can file a complaint," Morris said. "I'm not delivering torture methodology to anyone." Romano checked his watch. Charges are set, 30-minute timer. Once we initiate, we have to be 500 meters clear. They made final sweeps of the facility, ensuring nothing was left that shouldn't be carried, and nothing was carried that shouldn't leave. The culture chambers would burn, the surgical equipment would melt, the cells in the sub-basement would collapse under 6 tons of concrete and steel. Morris took one last look at the map of villages, each red pin marking a place where the research documented here had been field tested on civilian populations. 347 people in Zhao's mother's village, thousands more across Manchuria and China, all test subjects, all expendable data points in research that would never face full accountability. He pulled the map from the wall, rolled it carefully, and added it to the evidence cases. They evacuated the compound at 14:30 hours, Romano triggering the timer as they cleared the gate. The charges were set for simultaneous detonation, support columns first, then thermite throughout the laboratory spaces, finally phosphorus in the culture storage. The building would collapse inward, the fire would sterilize everything, and the sub-basement would be sealed under rubble. From the tree line 500 meters north, they watched the compound through the falling snow. Soviet artillery was clearly audible now, maybe 10 kilometers out. Advanced scouts could arrive within the hour. The explosion was not dramatic. No fireball, no thunderous detonation. Just a series of dull cracks as the charges severed support columns, followed by the grinding collapse of a building folding in on itself. The fire started seconds later, white-hot thermite burning through metal and stone, phosphorus consuming everything organic. Thick smoke rose into the gray sky. Within 20 minutes, the main structure was rubble. Within an hour, the fire would burn itself out, leaving nothing but scorched foundation and twisted steel. Zhao stood watching until the smoke obscured everything. My mother used to tell me about Zhaoqing village, the festival in autumn, the temple by the river, the way everyone knew everyone. He adjusted the strap on his pack, carrying documents that proved how his family died. Now it's just a red pin on a map, and the people who did it are probably already in American protective custody. Maybe, Morris said. Or maybe the documentation we're carrying will matter. Maybe someone will actually read it and do something. You believe that? Morris didn't answer. They reached the American forward position at 1800 hours, delivered the evidence to the intelligence officer, and filed preliminary reports. Morris's report stated that the facility was destroyed due to imminent Soviet advance and risk of biological agent release. Patterson's medical report documented 7 subjects discovered deceased, cause of death consistent with facility collapse. Harper's photographic evidence showed systematic war crimes. Zhao's translations provided clear perpetrator identification. The research data, the actual experimental findings, the methodology, the results, burned with the facility. 3 weeks later, Morris received orders reassigning him to document industrial capacity in occupied Japan. Patterson was transferred to medical evaluation duties in Tokyo. Harper went to counterintelligence screening. Zhao was sent back to the States for language training. None of them were assigned to war crimes investigation. The evidence they collected was filed with Allied intelligence services. Some of it reached the Tokyo Tribunal. Most disappeared into classified archives. Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii was never prosecuted. In exchange for research data from other Unit 731 facilities, he and key personnel received immunity from Allied authorities. The official justification was that the biological warfare research was too valuable to lose, and that Soviet acquisition would pose a strategic threat. The subjects in the Harbin facility were officially recorded as discovered deceased during Allied facility assessment. No mention of mercy, no record of morphine, just another casualty statistic in a war that generated millions. Patterson kept his private journal for 30 years before burning it. The final entry, dated 1975, read, "We ended the experiments. We gave them the only mercy we could. We documented the crimes. We tried to ensure justice. We failed at everything except the mercy. But some nights I still see those children pressing their hands against the glass, and I wonder if even that was enough." Morris never spoke about Harbin again. When asked about his service in occupied Manchuria, he said only that he had been involved in facility documentation. Nothing more. Zhao returned to his work as a translator, but he never went back to China. He kept a copy of the village map in his personal files, 300 villages marked in red, including the one that bore his family name, evidence of crimes that would never be fully prosecuted. Romano became a contractor, demolition work and post-war construction. He never told anyone what he'd brought down in August 1945. Harper left military service and returned to police work. When asked why he never pursued federal law enforcement, he said he'd seen enough of how institutions protected their interests over justice. The facility site was eventually cleared by Soviet forces. They found the ruins of a collapsed building, scorched concrete, and scattered equipment too damaged to salvage. No viable research, no living subjects, no actionable intelligence. A small memorial was erected in 1995 by survivors of Unit 731 field trials, not at the Harbin site, which was too politically complex, but at a village in Heilongjiang province. Among the names listed of communities destroyed by biological warfare testing, Zhaoqing Village, population 347, August 1943. No one who carried the evidence from Harbin attended the dedication. Some burdens are too heavy to revisit.